Thanks so much for organizing this event. I have two sort of, in my short time, a couple main points. One is really a plug for the power of education. And secondly, just to draw attention to some interesting generational dimensions to the struggles that are happening on campus. So if I could, I'm just going to speak from my own experience as somebody who has worked in universities for 40 years, first as a student, then as a graduate student and researcher, and then finally now as a tenured professor in the United States. I've worked at all sorts of very what you would usually would be thought of as liberal institutions. So I just want to mark that. What I'm talking about is a culture of repression in the most liberal of our institutions. So 40 years ago, when I was a graduate student, I'm sorry, a university student, which we would call an undergraduate student, I come from a fairly, well, a Jewish Christian family, but that was a de facto Zionist family. It wasn't really ever explained, but it was just sort of part of the water we drank. I never would have come to any understanding of Palestine if it weren't for Palestinian students who lived with me in a dormitory and who I think we would say schooled my ass. I had all sorts of opinions about that part of the world, and these men were so patient and generous with me to kindly explain their families' histories in the face of total disbelief on my part. I just need to say that. I don't think it's unusual that for people like myself, we come to an understanding of Palestinian through Palestinian witnessing, right? And the generosity of Palestinians taking their time to explain their reality to us. 40 years ago, if you were a student at an American university, if you were trying to study American history or world history, you would have been largely dealing with mythologies. The curriculum at that time was, if you wanted to study what is now understood to be settler colonialism or even a history of slavery, at least where I studied, I was given a whole bunch of well, what I understand to be foundational myths of settler colonial culture in the United States. If you wanted to learn about settler colonialism or even slavery, you had to look very hard at the university to find it. In my university, Berkeley, you would have to go to one of the departments, African American Studies, Native American Studies, Asian American Studies, Latino, Chicano Studies. There you would find it, but they were for a lot of folks coming from my background, they were not hard, they were not easy to find, but they existed. So they were serving lots of students. But for people like me, I ended up having to go outside the university. It's really important just to state that. Like, you could not study settler colonialism as a real academic subject or even topic within a discipline without leaving the university to do it. Okay, so yeah, those are the two things I want to say about my education. Flash forward to today. Remarkably different. First of all, the curriculum now includes empirically based critical study of not just settler colonialism and slavery, but also their enduring legacies, understanding that these aren't just events in the past, but in fact, structures that continue to shape our lived lives today. They're contested, of course, but they're present in most places, and in fact, in the core curriculum in many high schools as well. All those same departments, Black Studies, Asian American Studies, Chicano, Latino American Studies, Native American Studies, they are at the forefront today of advocating for Palestinian rights. In a way, those are the disciplines who always got it, and they're the ones who have contributed, I would say, largely to student education around this. A second dimension that was not around 40 years ago to the same degree it is now, which is the children and grandchildren of immigrants from the global South, from Southeast Asia, from South Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, the Caribbean, from Central America, Latin America, many of them bringing stories of direct family experience of U.S. imperialism in those places, but many of them bringing maybe what we could call more broadly a global South consciousness, an understanding of the freedom struggles around the global South and their relationships both to long histories of colonialism and contemporary American imperialism. And finally, today, Palestinian witnessing is still at the core of education around these topics. So that still remains. They've been 75 years of teaching the rest of us how to see the world they live in. It's a huge burden, but the education pays off, I want to say. Those same students now understand their lives are completely intersected with freedom struggles in the United States. Black freedom struggles, Native American freedom struggles. For instance, 10 years ago, Standing Rock was Native American struggles in the Midwest, hugely important. Palestinians are there, and that struggle understands it's linked with Palestine. Same with Black Lives Matter. Okay, so that's a huge shift in 40 years. So nowadays, and this is to move to the current, to kind of give a quick statement about today, students are highly educated in settler colonialism. They're very educated in the legacies of slavery and how those two things link up with freedom struggles and enduring structures of repression and oppression in the United States and around the globe. Here, I want to draw attention to the generational dynamic, which is people my age. If you take an average white guy who's educated and so on, my age, so 50 on up, they are probably deeply ignorant of the legacies of settler colonialism and even the facts of that, because they were not taught it in college and they probably weren't curious enough to learn about it ever since. So our administrators are far less educated on these topics than the students there at the universities. That just needs to be underscored. The second thing is our students are highly, highly organized. They've created networks regionally and nationally. Here in Washington, D.C., where I teach and live, 7 universities around the city combined to create one encampment on the campus of George Washington University. 7 universities. Faculty from these 7 universities have never united in anything. There is no cooperation across these universities. The students have created it completely do it yourself without George Soros or any other evil mastermind. That's one thing. Secondly, these networks are also combining with pre-existing social justice networks, again, BLM, but also national organizations like the Students for Justice in Palestine or Jewish Voices for Peace and so on. Thirdly, they're generating demands that are clear and reasonable and informed. Again, they're coming out of they're deeply informed, these students. So the divestment campaigns that other people have talked about here, that they're sharing information. They know that their universities are investing in war. They know they're investing in surveillance technologies, and they know they're investing in genocide, right? This is a surprise. The administrators oftentimes don't know this. The students know more than the teachers in many cases. And finally, they're offering material solidarity. So lots of students, we now are trying to find ways to, for instance, help and stand in solidarity with our colleagues whose universities have been destroyed across Gaza. This is the least we could do as professional academics. But again, the students are driving this and they see this. What are they facing? They're facing, we could say, a range or a spectrum of responses from universities, from the most repressive to, in fact, a series of negotiated settlements that we've seen. They're a little more ambiguous. So the more repressive ones we've seen are places in the South, places like Texas, or even in Ohio State, where the governors, the university presidents called in snipers. They called in snipers, and live bullets, rubber bullets, but live bullets were used at UCLA. So that's at one end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, we see usually small liberal arts colleges negotiating with students around, for instance, around demands having to do with divestment and boycott. They are getting no love and no support from any of the legacy institutions of our liberal society. The corporate media is doing what it did during the Iraq War. It is in full genocide denial. Both our political parties are united in their support of genocide. Our liberal institutions, philanthropies, museums, things like Penn, they're all lined up in support of genocide. So they're not getting a lot of, the students are getting a lot of support from these kind of legacy institutions. but the contradictions are growing, and this makes me very optimistic. One contradiction, for instance, the Democratic Party claims to be a multiracial coalition that promotes the rule of law and free and fair elections. Well, other people on this panel have already pointed out the contradictions or hypocrisies of this discourse. But the students are showing it very, very clearly. And in fact, it might cause the Democratic Party a lot of grief come November. Other organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, which historically has worked hard to combat anti-Semitism in the United States. Those of you who are aware of American history also know that the Anti-Defamation League for decades has also worked hard on Hezbollah campaigns to support Israel no matter what it does. But they are so extreme in their use and weaponization of anti-Semitism that they have, I think, finally emptied the word of all its meaning, and it certainly carries no moral weight with our students anymore. That's something that we'll need to work through because that was important work, but the ADL has completely lost any legitimacy it once had. I'm just going to conclude by saying I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because the students are so well organized. They are so well educated. When a debate actually happens, when a debate is allowed to happen, the other side has no weapon. They have no defense. The students know that. That's why these institutions are clamping down on debate. And secondly, they're inspiring. These students, you go to the encampments, it is not all anger and grief, although that is there. We are angry and we are sad. We are deeply grieving what is happening in Gaza. But people are also eating together. They are praying together. They're singing together. They're dancing together. And this is a generation that, unlike mine, knows joy and wants joy to be part of this freedom struggle. And so these two things really make me optimistic about what's to come. Thanks.